What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. Okay, so we have got Numbers chapter 9 lined up for today, and the past couple of chapters seem like they've been focused on preparing the Tabernacle in particular for going through the wilderness to the Promised Land. And I guess in a way, that kind of theme, at least for the people in general, is still kind of, the core of what's going on in Numbers here. But anyway, so let's hop right in and see what happens in this chapter. So, Numbers chapter 9, here we go. A year after Israel's departure from Egypt, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. In the first month of that year, he said, "Tell the Israelites to celebrate the Passover at the prescribed time, at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. Be sure to follow all my decrees and regulations concerning this celebration." Because, a year after their departure from Egypt would have been a year after the first Passover, and it was laid out right around that time, I think, that, there was a set day and time for all that stuff to happen. Footnotes: the first month of the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar usually occurs within the months of March and April. I think we also established that when talking about the Passover previously in Exodus. And that particular day generally happened within the same time frame, is all that footnote is saying. So, I guess really God's just kind of telling Moses to remind the people that, the Passover wasn't just a one-time, holiday event or whatever. It was a continual thing for them to celebrate annually. But anyway, verse 4. So Moses told the people to celebrate the Passover in the wilderness of Sinai as twilight fell on the 14th day of the month. And they celebrated the festival there, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. But some of the men had been ceremonially defiled by touching a dead body, so they could not celebrate the Passover that day. They came to Moses and Aaron that day and said, "We have become ceremonially unclean by touching a dead body. But why should we be prevented from presenting the Lord's offering at the proper time with the rest of the Israelites?" Moses answered, "Wait here until I have received instructions for you from the Lord." So, these men, for whatever reason, had touched a dead body. Likely scenario would have been to, bury said dead body. But since it was so close to the Passover, possibly even that day, they, still wanted to give the offerings and such that they were supposed to, because that was also commanded by the Lord, that they were supposed to give the offerings for the Passover. So there's like a bit of a conflict with the commands that they've been given from God. Do they follow the, you're defiled, you can't bring your offerings command, or do they follow the, it's the Passover, you need to bring these offerings command? And with that in mind, Moses is like, all right, let me get a conference call with God going on here, and I'll let you know what he says. So, then we get to verse 9. This was the Lord's reply to Moses. Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If any of the people now or in future generations are ceremonially unclean at Passover time because of touching a dead body, or if they are on a journey and cannot be present at the ceremony, they may still celebrate the Lord's Passover. They must offer the Passover sacrifice 1 month later at twilight on the 14th day of the second month. They must eat the Passover lamb at that time with bitter salad greens and bread made without yeast. They must not leave any of the lamb until the next morning, and they must not break any of its bones. They must follow all the normal regulations concerning the Passover. Okay. So, basically, the compromise, I don't know if that's the best word because, this is God we're talking about, but the command in this case was, okay, yes, you still should celebrate the Passover, but not at the normal Passover time. Wait a month and then celebrate it. Footnote there, just saying it would have been in late April, May, or early June, because, their calendar worked different than ours, and it would have been 1 month of that calendar later. So, but otherwise, all the regulations are pretty much the same. I don't remember the bitter salad greens being mentioned in the normal Passover, meal plan. But whether or not it was there, that might be the only change that I can think of here, aside from, obviously, the day of them celebrating it. Anyway, and, okay, so it specifically mentions being ceremonially unclean because of touching a dead body. Well, and it also mentions if they can't be present at the ceremony. I would assume other means of being unclean would probably be included in this. I think that's a pretty safe assumption, even though it doesn't directly say that in the Bible. Because, regulations were generally the same regarding various forms of uncleanness. So anyway, verse 13. But those who neglect to celebrate the Passover at the regular time, even though they are ceremonially clean and not away on a trip, will be cut off from the community of Israel. If they fail to present the Lord's offering at the proper time, they will suffer the consequences of their guilt. And if foreigners living among you want to celebrate the Passover to the Lord, they must follow these same decrees and regulations. The same laws apply both to native-born Israelites and to the foreigners living among you. So, yeah, I think this was also kind of, in a way, God having, basically adding more detail in order to try and maybe head off a little bit of, lying, for lack of a better word, just people trying to get out of giving the Passover offering for whatever reason, whether they don't think they can, afford it, or, if they just are really busy that day, or whatever else is going on. Unless they were literally away on a trip, or they were ceremonially unclean, there was no excuse. They had to make the offering and do all that stuff for the Passover. Otherwise, out they go. Now it says, if foreigners living among you want to celebrate the Passover, does that mean that they had the option? I guess it doesn't really make sense. It might not really be quite fair to expect the outsiders to follow, the same regulations and celebrate the same occasions. I do think, though, that the majority of outsiders, living with them were generally subject to following the same laws. I mean, if they were going to live with the Israelites for an extended time, if it was just a brief little, hey, I'm passing through your town, can I stay for a bit? That wouldn't have really been the same case. But maybe I'm wrong on that whole, outsiders actively living among them, following the same procedures and whatnot. But still, in any case, if they were going to celebrate the Passover, the outsiders, in this case, they didn't get any different treatment in that way. The Passover is the Passover. You can't celebrate it differently just because, you were not a native-born Israelite. Anywho, okay. Enough about that. Moving on to verse 15, which I guess gets us through the rest of the chapter, if I read all this paragraph at once. So, verse 15. On the day the tabernacle was set up, the cloud covered it. But from evening until morning, the cloud over the tabernacle looked like a pillar of fire. This was the regular pattern. At night, the cloud that covered the tabernacle had the appearance of fire. When the cloud lifted from over the sacred tent, the people of Israel would break camp and follow it. And wherever the cloud settled, the people of Israel would set up camp. In this way, they traveled and camped at the Lord's command wherever he told them to go. Then they remained in their camp as long as the cloud stayed over the tabernacle. If the cloud remained over the tabernacle for a long time, the Israelites stayed and performed their duty to the Lord. Sometimes the cloud would stay over the tabernacle for only a few days, so the people would stay for only a few days, as the Lord commanded. Then at the Lord's command, they would break camp and move on. Sometimes the cloud stayed only overnight and lifted the next morning. But day or night, when the cloud lifted, the people broke camp and moved on. Whether the cloud stayed above the tabernacle for 2 days, a month, or a year, the people of Israel stayed in camp and did not move on. But as soon as it lifted, they broke camp and moved on. So they camped or traveled at the Lord's command, and they did whatever the Lord told them through Moses. Okay, now, I'm kind of wondering why this is appearing right, within the same chapter and immediately after talk about the second Passover. I mean, I know there was stuff about the tabernacle being dedicated in the previous chapter or two, so I guess it was just within the timeline, those were pretty close to each other. But a lot of this was kind of already told to the people previously. I forget whether it was in late Exodus or somewhere in Leviticus, but they had been, commanded to just follow the cloud wherever it went. And also that, the cloud would appear in a form like fire at night. Just, I mean, first off, clouds at night, especially if, it's like a new moon or something like that, aren't necessarily so easy to recognize. But if it's glowing like fire, yeah, pretty easy to spot that in the midst of, the darkness of night. So then kind of as it says, they just moved or stayed along with the cloud whenever it happened to move or stay. Footnote there. Hebrew, it says, covered the tabernacle, the tent of the testimony, rather than just saying it there. Anyway. But, yeah. So, I'm also noting that, it specifically mentions various lengths of time that the cloud would stay in one place. And kind of like, God talking about the people following or not following his commands back in Leviticus. I'm thinking this is, another somewhat prophetic statement. Or actually, this is not a direct quote from God even, so this could be just like a summary type of thing written in hindsight. But anyway, don't be surprised if it mentions, those things later on. So anyway, I guess that about wraps it up for Numbers chapter 9. Would love to say I have more thoughts on it, but I really kind of don't. It seems fairly simple, fairly easy to understand. So that's going to do it for Numbers chapter 9. As always, like the video if you enjoyed it, share it with others if you want them to see, subscribe to my channel, and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description if you want more than just my videos. You'll see links to my social media profiles and all that kind of stuff. And below that, leave any thoughts you have in the comments, whether it's related to, Bible study stuff or other video ideas or whatever you have for me. So that's it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.